A few months ago, a friend of mine gave me a book that she thought I would love because I love stories about magic and fantasy. And it's a book written by the author Nnedi Okorafor, who was actually one of the writers for the Black Panther film. I'm not going to read the title. We're talking about perfection, imperfection. I'm not going to read the title because it does include a word that to some people is a slur. I do, however, encourage you, if you want to know more about the book after the service, because I think it's lovely, to come and see me. But for the time being, I'm just going to call it Nnedi's book. So in Nnedi's book, the lead protagonist is a Nigerian-American girl named Sunny. Sunny lives in Nigeria, but she spent the first 9 years of her life in the United States. And Sunny was born with a form of albinism that has given her light yellow hair, hazel eyes, and very light skin that burns severely when she is out in the sun. And because of these parts of herself, Sunny often feels out of place and odd. She feels like she is flawed when she looks at herself compared to her family. She's often taunted for being different by other children at school. And Sunny feels alone. But a few chapters into the book, Sunny finds out that she has inherited magical abilities, that she is what is called a leopard person. And she soon becomes part of a group of underage magical students. And she and they live this double life among lambs, or non-magical people. Now, throughout this book, Nnedi Okorafor includes excerpts from one of the books that Sunny is reading as a part of her studies as a leopard person. And in a chapter titled Your Abilities, Sunny's book reads these words: lambs, non-magical people, are on a constant, unrealistic, irrational, and unnatural quest for perfection. They seek to have bodies with no blemishes or disease, that do not age, that have the perfect eyes, nose, and lips in the right places, that are thin like fashion models or muscular like athletes, that are tall, lacking warts, extra fingers, pimples, and scars, that always smell fresh like flowers. There are no lamb cultures where people do not strive for this inferior thing called perfection, no matter their definition of it. This inferior thing called perfection. I have read this book many times over, and that line sticks out to me not only because it's a fantastic turn of phrase, but also because it's true. Think about it. Perfect. What does perfect mean? Perfect is this ideal, but it's unrealistic to think we can be perfect. It's this unattainable thing. Perfect, it assumes that it's possible to hold every one of us, everything, to this single and strictly defined standard. Apparently I'm channeling Vanna White today. And perfection not only says that we have this standard, but that we must constantly strive to move towards that standard, that we have to hold everybody else to that standard. Perfection assumes that the things that we call flaws or faults don't have value. It assumes that they can't be a place of strength or of connection, that our flaws, our faults, they don't have a place in a world that is good and worthy. In her book, Broken Buddha, the UU minister, Reverend Meg Barnhouse, reflects on our lamb drive for perfection. It comes from the fear we all carry of not being good enough. That there is something secretly wrong with us that is not wrong with anyone else, a deficit we must cover and adjust for in all our interactions. It can drive us to try to control everything around us, to make everything and everyone do just right. In Sunny's case, in Nnedi Okorafor's book, this need for perfection to fit a particular way of how she looks and how she should be with people in her country, it isolates and disconnects her. And I'm pretty sure it might do the same for some of us. When we strive for perfection, we try to ignore parts of ourselves, and so we don't connect to the wholeness of who we are. We don't connect to the true wholeness of who we are. We don't allow ourselves to fully connect with others as our whole selves, with our faults and our flaws. If anybody has been on a first date, some of you might know, you go there and you say, I'm not going to tell this part of my story to this person because I want them to like me. You might fudge a little bit about your age. The Spanx might come out. And then as the relationship may evolve, you might start to show some of those flaws. You might start to realize, oh, in this relationship I'm loved and I can show some of these things that maybe I didn't think I could before. When we strive for perfection, it doesn't make us whole. It actually leaves us even more incomplete. And when we look at how we are with each other in this drive for perfection, it doesn't leave much room for difference, for variety, for the unique gifts that help us to draw a wider circle that includes not just many, but all. Perfection, it devalues us and others. And when it's turned inward, perfection can lead to a devastating lack of self-worth, devastating lack of self-love. Perfection, when we turn it outwards, it can lead to harmful and even violent dehumanization of others for not fitting our molds. And y'all, perfection takes so much energy. It is exhausting to try to chase how we ought to be rather than embracing and amplifying who we already are. Just imagine what it would be like to just be. And one last note about perfection, it's absolutely absurd. When I was looking up the dictionary definition of it, the example they gave, and I quote, "He's such a perfect baby, he doesn't cry at all." If anybody has a crying baby, I'm sure you probably take offense to that. In our time of meditation and reflection, we asked you to share, to reflect on, what inside you is imperfect, what inside you is flawed. We also ask you to reflect on what inside you is glorious, what inside you is a source of strength. I'm going to take a poll. How many of you found it much easier to name the flaw than the strength? How many of you found it easier to name the strength than the flaw? So I don't know if a lot of you looked around, but it was a lot easier for many of us to name our flaws. We're trained to be critical of ourselves. We're trained to be more adept at finding something wrong with ourselves and with others. We're trained to believe that to be worthy, we have to work for it. We have to work to be enough. We have to work to be loved. It's so ingrained in us that even thinking about what it would be like to release the idea of perfection feels like such a huge shift in how we understand ourselves and the world. It feels almost as impossible as perfection. See, releasing perfection, that need to be perfect and fitting a mold, it requires a significant shift in how we love ourselves and how we love each other. A shift that would open our hearts to those flaws in a way that imagines a world so much bigger because of them. A world shaped by what we have been told are faults. So what would that look like to try to take that shift in our perspective, that shift in how we see each other? You're going to help me figure it out. You all wrote on those pieces of paper, right? So I invite you to hold up the paper so that the word imperfect is facing the pulpit. And I'm doing this because for me, it's very easy to have my inner critic in this moment say, what the heck are you doing, Ranwa? This is an absurd sermon. What is going on? Everybody hates this. Oh my God, you stuttered over this word. It's very easy for me to have the imperfections right in front of me. I do got that right. Yeah. But what if I start looking at those imperfections a little differently? What if I start to see that, well, I'm taking a risk. I'm trying something different. I'm looking at how something that I struggle with could be something that opens us all to the idea that we're all struggling in this together. What if I take that imperfect self, those things I think are wrong, and I look at them as an opening, an invitation? Well, hey, I'm starting to see the glorious side of all those imperfections and those flaws. The glorious side of trying to do something new. And then when I look at the glorious things, the things that a few of us found easier to identify, I can think how they have some roots in those things I were told were flaws. Now I think about how I have an absurd obsession for justice. And a lot of it comes from having experienced and witnessed people I love being treated as less than, as being treated as flawed. So that's one way to look at it. There's another way to look at it in words. There's a blog called Grimy God. And it's a blog that takes things that we would consider disgusting: used gum, cat boxes, mystery meat, vomit, beard food, bed bugs, oh, pink eye, and it finds beauty in them. So today, on this glorious spring day where many of us are probably sneezing our noses off because of the pollen and all of the allergens out there, I invite you to join me in a prayer to allergies. Oh, all-knowing allergy, all the world is filled with your wonder. Bless me with your hypersensitivity, that I might react with passion to the humblest of your creations. When lost in thought, I wander past a hillside in bloom, bring tears to my eyes. When I ignore the playfulness of kittens, raise up my skin in hives to praise you with rosy color. When trees make love and shower the earth with their pollen, and I but think of my chores, trumpet forth from my nose and mouth, that surrounded by the sylvan circle of life, all the world might say to me, God bless you. Amen. And in Nnedi Okorafor's book, the same thing happens to Sunny. In the rest of that chapter that Sunny is reading about her abilities, it reads, "We leopard folks are nothing like this. We embrace those things that make us unique or odd. For only in these things can we locate and then develop our most individual abilities." It turns out that Sunny's albinism is a reflection of her strength to become invisible. It turns out that her being both Nigerian and American helps her to grow both cultural understandings. There are other folks with leopard abilities. Folks who are dyslexic have the ability to undo bad magic. Folks with skin problems have an ability to predict and manipulate the weather. Now, as far as I know, none of us have magical powers. Maybe you do, I don't know. Talk to me afterwards. For us, releasing perfection, it's not just about breaking the mold. It's about loving whatever shape we leave in the clay, whatever angles and curves, whatever divots and bumps it becomes, and it has. And to see those features of that clay as valuable. Instead of fixing ourselves and each other and trying to make ourselves become this unrealistic thing, we can learn to make room for all of us. Releasing this drive for this inferior thing called perfection, it means saying to ourselves, I don't have anything to prove. And it means saying to each other, you don't have anything to prove. So what happens when we love our so-called imperfect selves? In her book, Broken Buddha, Meg Barnhouse continues and says, when I feel loved, my mind breathes better. My body relaxes, my behavior steadies. Something in my spirit opens like a rose. In Our Time for All Ages, when Anahi is trying to convince Samira to change her skin color, Samira's refusal is an act of self-love. It is an act of breaking away from this idea that any one color is more than the other. It defies this idea that to be perfect, you have to be this thing. Samira's self-claiming of being enough is one way to release that drive for perfection. And in my own life, I think about the things that I've struggled with as flaws. As somebody who lives with clinical depression, it can be very hard for me to feel like I am enough. It can be hard for me to even stand up here and tell you, I live with clinical depression. But I found that in my chaplaincy, particularly working with people who have mental health conditions, that owning that reality, owning who I am and what I feel in that experience, helps me to create a connection with others who may feel that same shame. Helps me to tell them you're not alone. Helps me to tell them you are enough. I also, most of you probably know, I identify as a queer Muslim. The trouble with that identity is that growing up, I felt too queer to be Muslim. And then in a lot of queer spaces, I felt too Muslim to be queer. What the heck am I supposed to do with that? Well, I went to an LGBTQ Muslim retreat a few years ago. And there I found people celebrating the fact that they lived as queer and Muslim. That was a wonderful intersection, that it wasn't not being enough for either, that we were enough and whole. And so I got my nice little superhero, queer plus Muslim equals fabulous shirt. We embrace those things that make us unique or odd. For only in these things can we locate and then develop our most individual abilities. What are those things you haven't been allowed to embrace? What are those pieces of your story you haven't been allowed to include? When we begin to break free from that unrealistic, irrational and unnatural quest for perfection, we not only begin to heal ourselves, we begin to be ourselves. When we let go of the belief that perfection is needed to be good, we let go of the fear that we will not be loved if we invite others to see all of who we are. It's hard work, it's painful work, it's liberating and beautiful work. And it's work that we can't do alone. So how do we support each other in it? How do we say, you don't have to be perfect, we don't have to be perfect to be whole? Natalie, you think you can help us out with that next week? Come next week and find out.